It's been a while. We did some stuff for Solo. We talked for
Oh,
Solo.
we did. I
Um,
remember. Were you in France with us?
no, no,
LA.
it was in LA. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
Brian, you have 4 minutes. Ready when you
okay.
are.
Well, we can
Well,
talk a little longer. We can give you an extra minute. I have a
well,
break
first,
after you, so we can talk for a minute.
Happy Life Day in case you celebrate.
Thank you. Yes, it's a big day in the Kasdan household. We all get together and do something.
Um, I wanted to ask about the show really kind of captures this modern sense, but it has this 80s fantasy tone, right? And there's so
Yeah.
many touchstones to um 80s adventure, right? Not just like your dad's work, but across the gamut of 80s adventure. And I'm wondering like what those touchstones were for you as you were developing Willow.
Well,
Other than
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many that really is you get to the heart with that question of first of all, a big part of the reason we wanted to do this at all, was that there was those movies are so beloved for me and for all the filmmakers who were sort of associated with developing this show. And like to give you an example, like I had a producer named Max Taylor who I worked with pretty much every day on the show, and I don't think one of those days went by where we didn't reference Ghostbusters 2 as a stalwart, like the plot of Ghostbusters 2 being a point of reference for us in nearly every element of making this show. And it's just because those are the movies we grew up on, and those are the devices and the versions of executing sort of tropes that we loved, and wanted to service that. And we wanted to get one thing you really want in these shows, and you have some successes and some things that you feel like are less of a success, but you want to get the experience you feel you had of watching trailers as a kid, and those big action moments in trailers that you got in movie theaters for me it was like the cliffhanger trailer. It was stuff like that spoke to me about a spirit of sort of adventure and a desperate need to be there Friday night at 8 p.m. for whatever I was going to get to see. That has really sort of gone away for me a little bit in the culture, just with how much, first of all, how much we get before the movie comes out, how much other stuff there is when you're in that opening weekend. So we wanted to capture a little of that feeling of just anticipatory popcorn excitement.
Speaking of trailers, it's interesting you mentioned that because I have this vivid memory of the Willow trailer that was on like 9 other VHS tapes that I had, and
Yes,
the color palette and the way it looked feels like stuff that you all actually got to put in like episode 7 actually.
very intentionally. I mean, that trailer was absolutely the reason we did that. And in my geek brain, I thought, well, what if there was some omnipresent, sort of omniscient intelligence behind the telling of this story? And even when they conceived that teaser trailer in 1987 or whenever it was made, they foresaw a distant episode where you would get to actually go to that place. And that was exactly what I wanted to do and evoke and hope to keep doing.
I want to ask, I mean, you've worked for Lucasfilm on 2 different properties,
Yeah.
huge properties, Star Wars and Willow. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering, Star Wars, the canon feels a lot more locked down, and Willow has a
Yes.
few different options in what had come
Yeah.
before. And I'm wondering how it differed. Like,
Well, what's interesting is, there's a similarity. And first of all, I mean, the connective tissue there, of course, is Pablo, who sort of is the keeper of those things and the one who sort of most elegantly sort of dances between what is canon and what is legends and all of that. But I had a conversation with Pablo right at the beginning for this very reason and said, like, listen, let's talk about the Shadow Wars novels and how they figure in the canon. And he was very clear with me. He said, these are books that had been written sort of previously to coming to Lucasfilm. Chris was looking for someone to publish them. There was an opportunity at Lucasfilm to publish fantasy. It felt like with some very minor alterations, it could fit as a continuation of the Willow story. But the sort of fantasy that George and Chris were sitting in a room hashing out where Alora's story would go is exactly that, a fantasy. And he sort of relieved me of the burden of feeling like I needed to be beholden to those novels. And at that point, I sort of felt like we weren't. But beyond that one thing, we've tried to stay very faithful to everything that was written around Willow because there's so little. You know, we had the sort of source book that the RPG game was based on. That's a wealth of great sort of trivia and world building stuff. We have the novel that was, one of in an era when novelizations were a real, as they still are, but this was a real art form at the time and expanded the story in meaningful ways. And then we had all the stuff that was cut out of the movie. So we treated all that very seriously and like we needed to be loyal to those elements of the story.
Well, I've got to wrap up, but I just want to end by saying I hope you can make Solo 2 happen and maybe an Enfys Nest show.
Well, certainly you're not the only one who would gladly step into an Enfys Nest show, and she's amazing, and I couldn't be a bigger fan, you know.